she found a penny on the ground. Her neighbor laughed. 30 years later, that neighbor was struggling. Margaret was completely debt-free. She never earned a high salary, never won anything, never got lucky, but somehow, on an ordinary income, in an ordinary house, she built something extraordinary. Her secret wasn't talent. It wasn't luck. It was 50 rules so simple. People in 1955 thought they were obvious. Today, almost everyone has forgotten them, and it's quietly costing us thousands. But what happened next? No one saw coming.
Margaret had a rule about the ground. It sounds strange when you say it out loud, but she never walked past a coin she could see. Didn't matter if it was raining, didn't matter if she was in a hurry. If a penny was on the floor, on the sidewalk, in a parking lot, near a shop entrance, she picked it up, every single time. She called it her found money. There was a small jar near the front door, specifically for those moments. It wasn't a large jar, but over weeks and months it filled. And when it filled, she rolled the coins neatly and moved them somewhere more permanent. Her children grew up watching her do this. At first they were embarrassed. Later, much later, they understood. But Margaret's penny philosophy went deeper than just picking coins off the ground. She had a rule for herself that she rarely explained to anyone. When she found a coin or received one as change, she wouldn't spend it for at least 24 hours. One full day. That single pause created something powerful. It interrupted the automatic habit of spending. It forced a tiny moment of intention. And in that gap between finding money and spending money, she almost always decided the money was better saved than spent. She also had what her sister once called the copper tax. Every time Margaret made a purchase, any purchase, she mentally added 1 extra cent to the cost. Not a real cent, a psychological one. A small reminder that every transaction had a cost beyond the price tag. That invisible penny kept her mindful in a way that today's tap-and-go payments simply cannot replicate. Now, here is something that will make you smile. Margaret kept a small tin of old buttons near her sewing basket, buttons that had come loose over the years and been saved instead of thrown away. She used to sit with her youngest child and sort through them together. She would say, "Each button is worth a penny. How many pennies do we have?" It was a game. A simple, warm kitchen table game. But what it taught, quietly, gently, was the value of counting small things, the habit of seeing worth in what others overlooked. In 2026, we swipe past small charges without blinking. A 99-cent app here, a small convenience fee there, tiny amounts that disappear like smoke. Margaret would have noticed every single one. She also had a habit that sounds almost superstitious, but was actually deeply practical. She only spent old, worn coins. The new ones, the bright, shiny, freshly minted ones, those went straight into saving. It was psychological. The shiny coin felt different in her hand, more valuable, worth protecting. And that feeling stopped her from spending it casually. Every Sunday evening, without fail, she would open her purse completely. Every corner, every pocket, every small zipper. She pulled out every coin that had gotten lost or tucked away during the week. Not one penny was left behind. Then there was laundry day. Margaret actually looked forward to checking pockets before washing clothes. Not because she was thorough, though she was, but because any coin found in a pocket was treated like a small bonus, a reward the week had hidden for her. It went directly into what she called her bonus saving. She even had rules about soap. When a bar of soap wore down to its last thin sliver, the kind most people throw away, Margaret pressed it firmly onto the new bar. The two pieces bonded together. The old became part of the new. Not a penny wasted, not a fraction of value discarded.
kept her rolled pennies in a shoebox at the back of the closet, neatly wrapped in paper rolls.
Organized by amount. The shoebox was never discussed with visitors. It wasn't a secret, but it wasn't advertised either. It was hers, and it grew. And food. Oh, Margaret felt deeply about food. She believed genuinely and seriously that throwing food away was throwing money away. Every crust of bread, every last spoonful, every almost gone leftover. She would say that bite of bread cost a fraction of a penny, and fractions add up to dollars. She was right. Studies done decades later would confirm what Margaret knew by instinct. Food waste is one of the largest invisible expenses in any household. Then, and even more so now, when meal delivery apps make it easier to order new food than eat what's already in the refrigerator. But what Margaret was building in those early penny habits, it wasn't just savings. It was a mindset, a way of seeing the world, and that mindset was about to take her somewhere bigger. Time moved. The children grew. The grocery bills grew with them. And Margaret's habits quietly evolved from pennies into something larger. She had a rule about her wallet that her husband found both amusing and quietly admirable. There was always $1 bill inside it, just one, tucked behind everything else, and it was never, under any circumstance, spent. Not for emergency candy at the checkout line, not for a magazine that caught her eye, not even in moments of genuine temptation. That dollar was her anchor. It reminded her, physically, tangibly, that she was not someone who spent everything she had. She was someone who always kept something. When her penny jars reached a full dollar's worth of coins, after careful counting and rolling, she converted them immediately into a paper note. It was a ritual she enjoyed, the transformation of small into something that folded, something that felt more serious, more official. She also had a rule she kept faithfully about gift money. Birthdays came. Occasionally, a small gift of money came with them, a few dollars from a relative, a little envelope from a neighbor's celebration. Margaret thanked the giver warmly.
And she never spent that money, not once. It went somewhere it could grow, because gift money, she believed, was not meant for ordinary spending. It was meant to become something. She had her own quiet game she played with paper currency. If a dollar bill's serial number contained the number 7, that bill was designated lucky. Lucky meant saved. Lucky meant untouchable. Was it practical economics? Perhaps not entirely, but it gave her another reason to hold on to money rather than release it. And in the world of personal finance, any habit that creates a reason to save is a good habit. For smaller purchases, anything that cost under $5, Margaret made a personal challenge of paying with coins rather than paper bills. It slowed the transaction. It made her aware of exactly what she was handing over, and it preserved her paper money for things that genuinely required it. Every night before she turned off the bedroom lamp, she emptied every coin from her pockets and her purse into the jar on the nightstand. Not some coins, every coin. The nightstand jar was cleared every Sunday and added to the weekly count. She also had a clever trick with how she paid at shops. Whenever possible, she handed over a larger bill than needed, not to be difficult, but because the change she received back went directly into saving. It felt like a small game she played with every transaction. Pay large, receive change, save the change.
The shopkeeper became an unwitting contributor to her jar. She also practiced something she called her dry day. Once a week, every week, she spent nothing. Not a penny, not a nickel. She planned around it. She cooked from what was already in the pantry. She walked instead of taking transportation. She found entertainment in things that cost nothing. That one day of zero spending every week added up to over 50 spending-free days a year. 50 days of money that stayed home.
In 2026, try having one day with no card swipes, no online orders, no app purchases. Just one day. It is harder than it sounds, but the habit, once built, becomes natural. Margaret also kept small jars in multiple rooms of the house, the bedroom, the sitting room, even near the back door. Wherever a coin might land, there was a container waiting to catch it. Nothing was allowed to disappear into a couch cushion and be forgotten. And then there was the ironing. Margaret ironed everything, including her paper money. She pressed her dollar bills flat and neat with a warm iron, crisp, clean, formal looking. She said it was habit, but her eldest daughter, many years later, realized the deeper truth. When money looks serious, you treat it seriously. When it's crumpled and forgotten at the bottom of a bag, it spends itself. But even with all these careful habits in place, the real tests of her system were waiting in the kitchen.
Margaret's kitchen was her laboratory. Every surface held a lesson. She had a complicated feeling about dripping taps. Most people ignored them. A small drip, background noise. But Margaret would say firmly, without drama, a dripping tap is money leaving the house, nothing more. The moment a tap began to drip, it was fixed. Not next week, not when they got around to it, now. She kept her glass jars long after their original contents were gone. She peeled the labels off carefully, washed them, dried them, and put them back to work, holding flour, sugar, dried beans, buttons, coins, anything that needed a home. Buying new containers when you had perfectly good old ones, that was the kind of spending Margaret simply could not justify. Her small backyard garden was one of her proudest achievements. It wasn't large, but it produced tomatoes, green beans, herbs she used constantly in cooking. Every vegetable that came from that garden was $1 that stayed in the jar. She kept a careful record of what her garden saved her each season. The numbers surprised even her. Leftovers in Margaret's kitchen were not second-class food. They were ingredients waiting for their second life. Last night's roast chicken became today's soup. Yesterday's bread became tomorrow's breadcrumbs or a pan of bread pudding. Nothing left the kitchen by way of the trash if it could leave by way of someone's satisfied stomach. She had a standing rule with her children about the lights. Walk out of a room, leave the light burning, that was a 5-cent fine. The children thought she was joking the first time. She was not joking. The fine wasn't collected harshly, but the awareness it created was real. Children who grew up in that house turned lights off automatically for the rest of their lives. Old newspapers didn't simply stack up and then go to waste. Margaret bundled them and sold them to the scrap collector who came through the neighborhood. Not a large amount of money, but money that hadn't existed before. Money that the newspaper had already given her once in information and was now giving her again in coins. She made her own cleaning supplies, white vinegar, baking soda, simple ingredients that cost almost nothing and cleaned almost everything. The money she saved not buying branded cleaning products went quietly, predictably, into her savings system. Today, branded cleaning products with clever advertising cost far more than their simple ingredients justify. Margaret knew this before the advertisements existed. She walked. Any errand within a reasonable distance, she walked. Not because she was making a statement, because the cost of transportation for short distances was a poor use of money when 2 working legs were available. In 2026, we ordered delivery for things we could walk to in 7 minutes. The convenience fee alone on a single month of food delivery could fill several of Margaret's jars. Her mending hour happened every Thursday evening. She sat near the window with good light and her sewing basket. Anything that needed repair, she repaired it. A torn hem, a fraying cuff, a button that had finally given up. Thursday evenings kept her family dressed well without ever requiring a shopping trip. And the cold water wash, She washed clothes in cold water long before anyone spoke about energy efficiency. She did it because heating water cost money. Cold water was free. The clothes came out clean either way. She was right, and the quiet habits building in her household were about to meet the test of the outside world. The grocery store was where Margaret's discipline showed most clearly. She never entered one without a list, and the list was law. Not a suggestion, not a starting point, law. Every item written before she left home, every item considered before it earned a place on the paper. She also knew something about grocery store design that most shoppers never noticed. The expensive products sat at eye level, bright packaging, familiar names, easy to reach. The inexpensive alternatives, the ones that performed just as well, were always lower, on the bottom shelf, requiring a small bend, a moment of extra effort. Margaret always bent. That small physical action saved her real money every single week. When large quantities were available at better prices, but the quantity was more than one household needed, Margaret solved that problem simply. She split the purchase with a neighbor or a friend. Both families got the better price, neither family had more than they could use, everyone saved. This is the original version of what modern apps try to replicate with group buying features. Margaret invented it with a conversation over a fence. Sales were interesting to her, but not for the reason stores intended. She had a firm position. A sale on something you don't need is not a saving. It is a more socially acceptable way of spending money you hadn't planned to spend. She watched neighbors come home from sales, excited about what they had saved. She quietly calculated what they had spent. Those were very different numbers. When she needed something, anything, she looked for it used before she looked for it new. Thrift shops, neighbor sales, church bazaars. The condition was her standard, not the origin. If something worked well, it didn't matter where it had come from. She had no embarrassment about this. In a time before brand culture had fully taken hold, function was still more respected than image. And on the topic of brands, Margaret was unmoved by them. The store-brand flour made the same bread. The unbranded soap cleaned the same dishes. She read the ingredients. She compared the weights. The extra cost of the name printed on the front of the package was the only real difference. She kept that extra money. One habit that her daughter would later identify as the single most money-saving daily decision Margaret ever made was making coffee at home, every morning, without exception. The coffee she would have spent buying outside, that amount, calculated weekly, was redirected into her savings system. In 2026, a daily coffee shop habit costs the average person over $1,000 a year. Margaret's kitchen kettle paid for itself in 1 week. She kept a separate small envelope in her household system for unexpected small expenses, not the emergency fund, not the main jars, a buffer, a cushion specifically for the moments when something small appeared that the regular budget hadn't accounted for. This prevented small surprises from disturbing the larger system. Before buying anything of significance, she visited 2 different shops, not because she enjoyed walking, because she knew that prices varied, and the difference between the first price and the best price was money she deserved to keep. And the library card. Margaret treasured her library card. Books, magazines, reference materials, newspapers, all available for free. She spent nothing on reading material across decades of faithful reading. Knowledge was free. Entertainment was free. The library was one of the most powerful financial tools she ever used, and it never once sent her a bill. But beyond all these practical habits, the deeper shift in how Margaret thought about money That was where the real power lived.
By the time her children were teenagers, Margaret had developed something rare, a way of thinking about money that no one had taught her. She had built it herself, quietly over years of practice. Before she bought anything of real cost, she asked herself a single question. How many times will I use this, and what does it cost me each time I use it? A good pair of shoes worn 300 times costs almost nothing per wearing. A cheap pair worn 20 times before falling apart costs significantly more per step. This single calculation, which she called price per use, changed how she evaluated every purchase. She also had a rounding habit, so automatic she barely noticed it. When something cost $4.10, she registered it in her mind as $5. The 90 cents difference went into saving. It was never spent. Not because she forced herself, because in her mental accounting, it was already gone, already saved. It was a trick so clean and simple that modern financial advisors teach versions of it today. She always carried one coin in a specific pocket, not for spending, for genuine emergencies, the kind that truly could not wait. There was always one coin of last resort that no habit or rule could touch. She called it her peace of mind, because knowing it was there, she never felt completely without options. At one point in the 1960s, she conducted a family experiment. For one full month, the household used only cash, no credit, no payment plans. No buying on account from the local shop. If the cash wasn't there, the thing wasn't bought. That month clarified their spending like cold water clarifies muddy liquid. Everything unnecessary rose to the surface immediately. She taught her children about money using the most direct classroom available, actual pennies. She gave them small amounts and showed them how interest worked. Leave a penny here, it becomes more. Move it there, it grows differently. The lessons weren't complicated, but they were real, and the children who learned money from actual coins in their hands grew into adults who understood money far better than most of their peers. Margaret's secret jar was something she kept her entire adult life, not secret from her husband, not a hidden agenda, but a jar no one else knew the exact contents of, a personal reserve, true liquidity, she called it, money that was hers in the most fundamental sense, available, accessible, known only to her. When a budget month ran short before the calendar did, Margaret had a rule she followed without exception. The missing purchase simply waited. Next month. Not on credit, not borrowed from another envelope. The item could wait. She could wait. And the discipline of waiting, of saying next month instead of charge it, was perhaps the single most powerful phrase in her financial vocabulary. She used pictures. On each major saving jar, she taped a small image of what the money was working toward. A new oven, a family trip, a winter coat for the youngest. Seeing the goal made the sacrifice feel purposeful. The money wasn't disappearing into a jar, it was becoming something. And every dollar she saved, every single dollar, she applied the same principle automatically. 10% was saved before anything else was considered. Not 10% of what was left, 10% of everything that came in. First, always. That dime from every dollar built quietly for decades. And there was one penny Margaret kept her entire life in a small cloth pouch, never spent, not when times were hard, not in the moments of real crisis, not when she doubted, not when she was tired. That penny was not about its monetary value. It was about what it meant. It meant she was someone who always kept something, someone who, no matter what life presented, had never spent absolutely everything. The last penny was her identity, her quiet declaration of who she was. The year was 1985. Margaret was 67 years old. She sat at the same kitchen table. The legs were still slightly uneven. The burn mark was still there on one corner. But the table was different now in the way that old things become different, heavy with memory, heavy with meaning. Her grandchildren were visiting that afternoon. One of them, a sharp-eyed 10-year-old who reminded everyone of Margaret at that age, picked up the penny jar near the door. "Grandma, why do you still do this?" Margaret smiled. She took the jar gently. She held it at eye level and looked at the coins inside. Then she put it down and took the child's hand, and she walked her to the back bedroom. She opened the closet. Inside was a shoebox, and inside the shoebox were old notebooks, decades of them, weekly numbers, penny tallies, grocery budgets from 1955, jar balances from 1962, first savings bond receipts from 1967. The child flipped through them slowly. The numbers were small at first, laughably small. 4 cents saved here, 11 cents found there. But as the pages turned, the numbers changed. The pennies became dollars. The dollars became accounts. The accounts became a life of quiet, dignified security. Margaret had never earned a remarkable income. She had never received a windfall. She had never taken a risk that kept her up at night. But she had applied 50 rules, some invented, some inherited, some discovered by necessity, consistently, patiently, and without giving up for 30 years, and the result was a life where she never owed anyone anything, a life where emergencies had answers, a life where her children started their own adult lives with lessons that no school had given them. That 10-year-old grandchild, the one holding the old notebooks, grew up and applied those lessons in her own life, with apps instead of jars, with bank accounts instead of shoeboxes, with automatic transfers instead of Sunday evening counting. The tools changed completely. The wisdom did not change at all. We are living in the most expensive time to be a consumer in modern history. Inflation touches everything: groceries, rent, fuel, even the digital subscriptions that didn't exist 20 years ago. We are being asked to pay more for everything, while our attention is being pulled in 1,000 directions designed to make spending feel effortless. Margaret never had to fight algorithms. She never had to resist a notification that said, "Your cart is waiting." She never received an email at midnight with a flash sale that expired in 3 hours. She only had to resist her own desires, her neighbors, the magazine on the kitchen counter, and she managed it, with glass jars and a pencil and a penny she never spent. What would Margaret make of 2026? She would pick up a penny from the ground. She would make her coffee at home. She would walk past the bottom shelf and choose the value option without embarrassment. She would cancel the subscription she hadn't used this month. She would ask before every purchase, "Will this matter in 5 years?" And she would look at the number in her bank account every single week. Not once a month, every week. Because money you don't look at is money you don't control. She knew that in 1955. It is still true now. If you're sitting somewhere right now feeling behind, feeling like the gap between where you are and where you want to be is just too wide, know this. Margaret started with $11 and a penny she found on the ground. She never had an advantage you don't have. She just decided that small things were worth protecting, that every penny deserved a purpose, that every dollar was a seed, and she was patient enough and stubborn enough to wait for the harvest. You have the same pennies she had, the same days, the same choice. The jar is waiting. The only question is whether you'll start filling it.
If this story moved you, leave a comment with the one habit you're starting this week. Share it with someone who needs to hear that small things still matter. And subscribe, because more of these forgotten wisdom stories are coming, and they are absolutely worth your time.